It is easy for others to project their discomfort onto her solitude, to call it loneliness, to call it rebellion, to call it sadness. But what is not seen is the quiet discipline of a life not dictated by another's expectations. There is a stillness to her mornings. She rises, not because someone needs her to, but because her own rhythm calls her. She prepares her space, her body, her mind, not for a partner's gaze, but for the clarity of her own being. This way of living is not built from bitterness. It is not built from rejection or loss. It is built from discernment, from knowing that companionship is sacred, not a prescription, and that one does not need to be incomplete in order to be open to love. She has learned that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. She is not waiting. She is not searching. She is walking, sometimes slowly, sometimes boldly, but always in a direction that honors her. There is an art to choosing your own silence over the noise of mismatched company, an art to not folding yourself to fit into someone else's comfort. That art is misunderstood. It unsettles the world, especially those who only know worth through being wanted. And yet, she continues. She tends to her peace like a garden. She sharpens her mind like a blade. She allows her emotions to rise, not to drown in them, but to understand them, to allow them their place without letting them become her master. Society may look for the man beside her as if she is a question with an answer missing, but she has realized she is not a question, she is the statement. There are those who think strength must be loud, that freedom must look like defiance, but her strength is in the choice she makes every day to stand without needing permission, to love without needing a mirror, to be without needing to be claimed. Not everyone will understand this path. That is why it is walked alone. But alone does not mean in darkness. Alone does not mean in fear. Alone means with the self, fully, unapologetically, present. Solitude is a conscious choice, not a deficiency. It is not the result of rejection, nor a consolation prize for those who could not find companionship. Rather, it is the deliberate and sometimes courageous decision to walk through life without being tethered to another's shadow. The modern woman who lives alone, without a man, does not do so because she has failed at love, or because love has failed her. Instead, she has often looked deeply into the structure of her life, examined her needs, her boundaries, her values, and made a choice that aligns with her inner truth. There is a long-standing narrative that paints solitude, especially a woman's solitude, as something to be pitied or fixed. Society has inherited generations of conditioning that position women as incomplete without a partner. This has created a lens through which a woman's independence is viewed as unnatural, or worse, undesirable. The woman who chooses to live alone, who does not tether her identity to a romantic counterpart, is often met with questions, concerns, and subtle suspicion. But the truth is, her choice is rarely reactive. It is reflective. It is rarely rooted in trauma, though healing might have played a part. It is rooted in a growing awareness of what it means to live in alignment with one's own rhythm. To be alone by choice requires a different kind of strength. It requires facing the discomfort that many spend their whole lives avoiding. It means not outsourcing one's happiness to another person. It means sitting with the silence of an evening and not mistaking it for emptiness. It is learning to embrace one's own company, to find peace in the quiet, and to trust in the self when external validation is not there to affirm it. Women who live alone are often in a constant dialogue with themselves. Their decisions are not filtered through the expectations of a partner. They learn what foods they truly like, what time they like to wake, what rituals bring them peace. They decorate not for approval, but for resonance. They design their lives not around what is traditional, but around what feels true. This does not make their life superior. It makes it intentional, and intention is a powerful force. There is also an inner clarity that begins to surface when a woman no longer has to dilute parts of herself to fit into a shared space. Without the constant presence of another's needs, moods, and energy, she begins to recognize what parts of her were genuine and what parts were performative. The smile she offered to keep peace, the silence she maintained to avoid conflict, the compromises she made before she even realized they were compromises, all of these are reevaluated when she lives alone. She begins to reconstruct her identity from within rather than through the echo of another's desires. In solitude, self-respect deepens. It no longer depends on affirmation or attention. The woman alone without a man does not need to be told she is enough. She knows it because she has lived the proof of it every day. She has faced evenings where no one called and still felt whole. She has celebrated her achievements in quiet rooms without applause and still felt proud. She has stood at windows watching the world pair off and still remained grounded in her choice. That kind of self-respect is not loud. It does not seek recognition, but it is unshakable. There is also a misconception that women who choose solitude are cold or emotionally closed off. But often the opposite is true. It takes emotional depth to live without the constant distraction of another person's presence. It takes courage to meet your fears, doubts, and longings without drowning them in companionship. A woman who lives alone learns to mother herself in ways no partner ever could. She learns to soothe her anxieties, to hold space for her wounds, to give herself the care and compassion she may have once outsourced. And, in doing so, she cultivates an emotional resilience that is both soft and strong. Her solitude is also a sanctuary. In a world that constantly demands her energy, her appearance, her obedience, her space becomes a place where she is sovereign. No one interrupts her flow, no one critiques her choices, no one rearranges her inner world. Her home reflects her internal harmony, whether it is filled with art or stillness, books or incense, music or silence, it is hers entirely. And this sovereignty is not selfish, it is sacred, yet the world often struggles to accept this. The absence of a man in a woman's life is still interpreted as a lack. People wonder what went wrong. They question whether she's just too difficult, or if her standards are too high. But such questions are based on the belief that every woman ultimately wants, or needs, a man to complete her. They ignore the reality that many women have explored partnership deeply and found it to be either unfulfilling or incompatible with their growth, or that some women simply feel more at peace alone. The truth is that not every woman finds freedom in coupledom. For some, real freedom begins only when they are unpartnered. There is also a deep listening that happens in solitude. A woman learns to hear her intuition again, without the noise of external opinions, without having to factor another's voice into every decision. She begins to trust her inner voice more. She is no longer living in constant negotiation. She is no longer shrinking or contorting to maintain harmony. Her boundaries become clearer. Her needs become non-negotiable. And in that clarity, she becomes magnetic, not necessarily to lovers, but to truth, to wisdom, to purpose. There are days, of course, that test her, days when silence feels too loud, when the weight of doing it all alone becomes heavy, but even in those moments, she does not regret her choice, because she knows that dependence is not the same as intimacy, and proximity is not the same as connection. She has seen too many people stay in unfulfilling relationships just to avoid being alone. She has watched women twist themselves into fragments just to say they have someone. She has chosen differently, not because she cannot have love, but because she refuses to settle for a love that diminishes her. She is not without desire, she is not without longing, but her longing does not lead her away from herself. It leads her deeper into herself. She is open to connection, but not desperate for it. She can share her space, her time, her body, and her heart, but only when it enhances her peace, not when it disrupts it. Her solitude has given her this discernment. She does not chase affection. She does not perform to be chosen. She chooses, and so her solitude becomes her strength. It is not armor, though it protects her. It is not a prison, though it sets boundaries. It is a mirror. It reflects who she truly is without distortion. It shows her what she's made of, not in comparison to anyone else, but in communion with herself. She has found something rare in a world full of noise, the sound of her own soul. There is also creativity that blossoms in solitude, without the constant pull of another person's emotional landscape. Her energy flows in new directions. She writes, she paints, she builds, she dreams. Her mind, once perhaps preoccupied with caretaking or pleasing or adjusting, now finds space to expand. She begins to ask questions she never had time for. What do I truly want? What does freedom feel like? What legacy do I wish to leave? These are not abstract musings. These are the foundations of a life lived with intent. The woman who lives alone is not afraid of love, but she is no longer governed by the fear of its absence. She knows that partnership, when rooted in wholeness, can be beautiful, but she also knows that wholeness does not depend on partnership. She no longer views love as something to acquire, but something to embody. And so, even alone, she loves her friends, her world, herself. This kind of life does not require permission. It does not need defending. It simply requires presence, and that is what she has cultivated. She is not waiting for life to begin. She is not on hold. She is not incomplete. She is simply alive, in her own way, on her own terms, with her own light. A woman who lives alone without a man is not waiting. She is walking her own path. That path is not lined with expectation or longing for someone to appear and complete her. It is not a pause in her story, not an interlude before the real life begins. This is her life. She is not standing still hoping to be noticed. She is not marking time until someone chooses her. She is in motion, deeply engaged with the unfolding of her own experience. Her path is not a substitute for something better that never arrived. It is the road she has chosen, the journey she claims fully. From the outside, people often look at the life of a woman who is not in a romantic partnership and presume absence. They see what is not there: no shared home, no couple photos, no spouse at her side, and they assume her life is missing something. But this interpretation reveals more about the observer than the observed. In reality, what appears as a vacancy to others is, for her, a space filled with purpose, intention, and depth. Her days are not structured around the idea of lack. They are structured around meaning, around alignment, around freedom. She walks her own path not because she is too proud or too wounded to accept companionship, but because she knows that being in motion, according to her own compass, is more sacred than waiting at the gates of someone else's journey. She is not a character in someone else's story. She is not positioning herself as the prize for a worthy partner to find. She is building her own narrative, brick by brick, step by step, often quietly, but never passively. There is a rhythm to her life that is not bound to romantic milestones. She does not measure time by anniversaries or declarations. She measures it by the growth of her spirit, by the evolution of her work, by the refinement of her habits. Each year she is more herself. Each day she becomes more fluent in the language of her own soul. She is not stalled. She is not delayed. She is not drifting. She is deliberate. Walking one's own path is not always easy. especially when that path deviates from the collective script. From a young age, women are often fed the idea that their lives culminate in partnership, that marriage or a long-term relationship is not just a personal choice, but a mark of having arrived. So when a woman does not follow this timeline, when she chooses solitude over entanglement or self-discovery over settling, others begin to wonder what's wrong, but there is nothing wrong. What she is doing is simply uncommon. And the uncommon is often misread as undesirable. Her path may not be paved in convention, but it is paved in clarity. She knows the difference between being chosen and being free. She knows how to enjoy her own company without needing someone else to reflect her worth back to her. She wakes when she chooses. She eats what she likes. She fills her hours with projects that nourish her. And she does all of this not because no one has asked her to do otherwise, but because she no longer feels the need to be directed. The woman who is walking her own path is not defined by resistance. She is not merely rejecting the idea of a relationship. Rather, she is moving toward something, toward wholeness, toward alignment, toward a life where her choices are not diluted by compromise that costs too much. She has likely known love. She may even long for it in some form, but she does not believe that love requires self-abandonment, and so she continues walking, trusting that those who are meant to walk beside her will not ask her to turn around. Along her path, she gathers tools, not trophies. She accumulates experiences, insights, and skills that reinforce her independence. She learns how to care for herself not just practically, but emotionally. She knows how to hold her own sadness without projecting it onto others. She knows how to celebrate without needing an audience. Her solitude has taught her that the deepest fulfillment does not come from being seen, but from being known, by herself first and foremost. She walks with questions, not answers, not because she is lost, but because she understands that life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a terrain to be explored. Her curiosity is wide and unashamed. She reads, she learns, she travels, she creates. She meets people not with the hunger of someone searching for salvation, but with the openness of someone already whole, already steady, already home. Her path includes disappointments, of course. Not every day is filled with joy, but even on the hard days, she does not fall into the illusion that a man would have spared her the difficulty. She does not romanticize partnership as an escape. She has seen too many people in relationships that hollow them out. She has listened to the quiet cries of women who stay for fear of the unknown. She does not envy security that comes at the cost of authenticity, and so she persists. She may walk slowly at times. She may rest. She may reorient when needed, but she never waits. Waiting implies that someone else's arrival will bring meaning to her steps, but her meaning is already here, beneath her feet, in every choice, in every boundary honored. In every morning she rises to meet the world as she is. She does not apologize for her direction. She does not soften her desires so they fit within another's comfort zone. She does not dim her light to make others feel brighter. On her path, there is no room for shrinking. She is not here to be palatable. She is not here to be pleasing. She is here to be real, to be full, to be alive. When others suggest that she should settle down, she hears the deeper implication. That movement without attachment is incomplete. But she knows better. She knows that settling is not the same as stability, that commitment without resonance is just a prettier form of confinement. She has learned that sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is to walk away from something that looks good on paper but feels wrong in her bones. She does not pretend that she needs nothing, but what she needs she chooses carefully. She values connection, but not at the expense of peace. She desires intimacy, but not if it demands her silence. She enjoys affection, but not if it comes tied to control. Her standards are not unrealistic. They are rooted in self-respect. And self-respect is not negotiable. This woman is not against love. She simply knows that love must walk beside her, not ahead of her, not pulling her backward, not asking her to pause her journey for someone else to catch up. She is open to companionship, but not if it requires her to sacrifice the essence of who she is becoming. Her path is sacred. It has been carved by fire, by solitude, by deep inner work. She cannot and will not abandon it for comfort. She has also learned to find joy in places others overlook: a quiet breakfast alone, a long walk through the park, the feeling of finishing a task without anyone watching. She knows the intimacy of solitude, the kind that does not isolate but deepens awareness, the kind that softens her from within. She no longer feels compelled to chase meaning in someone else's life. She finds it here, in the present, in her breath, in her choices. She is building a life, not decorating a waiting room. She is not preparing for someone else to arrive and give her permission to begin. She is already living, already contributing, already offering. Her presence is not a placeholder, it is the main event. She walks in the world with a quiet confidence, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that does not seek approval. She knows who she is when no one is watching. She knows what she values, even when others question it. Her path is not lit by consensus. It is lit by inner fire. At times, she may meet someone who asks to join her. If they match her pace, if they honor her autonomy, if they bring clarity instead of confusion, she may say yes. But that yes will never come from fear. It will never come from the hope of being saved. It will come from alignment, from respect, from resonance. Until then, or even if that moment never arrives, she keeps moving. Not toward an end point, but through a process, not toward a role, but into her full becoming. She does not seek completion outside herself. She is not an unfinished story. She is a path in motion, a life unfolding, a woman already whole. Her strength lies in self, mastery, and quiet discipline. It is not the strength that draws attention in loud rooms or demands applause from strangers. It does not arrive with fanfare or clamor for recognition. Instead, it is a strength born in silence, in repetition, in small but intentional acts carried out without anyone watching. It is in the way she rises each day and chooses again and again to stand by herself, not because she has to, but because she knows that relying on herself is not a punishment, but a power. The world often misreads this strength. They see the woman who lives alone, who does not rely on a man for emotional support, financial stability, or direction, and they assume she must be hard. They mistake her independence for detachment, her composure for coldness. But they fail to understand what it takes to hold yourself, not for a moment, not in a crisis, but consistently, day after day. They don't see the kind of inner structure it requires to build a life entirely from your own energy and vision. There is a discipline behind her stillness, a precision behind her peace. Self-mastery is not an inherited trait. It is cultivated. It is the result of conscious choice, of observation, of refinement. The woman who lives without a man learns to watch herself, not with judgment, but with clarity. She pays attention to the places where she leaks energy, the moments where impulse tries to override intention, the patterns she repeats when no one else is there to intervene. And slowly, she begins to change, not to become someone else, but to become more aligned with who she already is underneath the noise. She learns to govern her emotions, not by suppressing them, not by pretending they don't exist, but by understanding their origins. She does not lash out when she is hurt. She does not blame others when she is afraid. She does not depend on another to fix what is broken inside her. Instead, she sits with herself. She breathes through the discomfort. She names what rises in her, and she holds it like a teacher would hold a lesson, not with resentment, but with curiosity. This is what makes her powerful, not that she is never shaken, but that she knows how to return to her center again and again. There is a quiet rigor in how she lives. She may not have anyone holding her accountable, but she holds herself accountable. She sets her own standards, not because someone is watching, but because she respects herself enough to live with integrity. If she commits to something, she follows through. If she falls short, she reflects, not to punish herself, but to grow. Her strength is not reactive, it is proactive. She builds systems that support her well-being. She creates routines that nourish her mind, her body, her spirit. Even when she could drift, she grounds herself. The discipline of solitude sharpens her. Without external noise constantly guiding her attention, she becomes deeply attuned to her own internal signals. She begins to notice when she is exhausted, not when someone else tells her, but when her own body whispers it. She learns the difference between rest and avoidance, between effort and self-sacrifice. She learns when to push and when to yield. This discernment is not taught in schools. It is learned in the quiet spaces of solo living, in the small choices made day after day, year after year. Her self-mastery extends to how she speaks. She does not rush to fill silence. She does not speak just to be heard. She weighs her words, not to impress, but to express with precision. She knows the power of restraint. She knows that not every opinion needs to be voiced, not every impulse needs to be acted upon. She has learned that discipline in speech is not censorship. It is clarity, and in that clarity, she becomes a force. A woman who is not ruled by her reactivity becomes unshakable in a world addicted to chaos. When she faces conflict, she does not collapse. She does not run to be rescued. She does not lose herself in the emotions of others. Instead, she returns inward. She asks, "What am I feeling? What is true for me here? What is my responsibility and what is not mine to carry?" And she answers, not with the need to win, but with the desire to stay in alignment. Her strength is not about dominance. It is about sovereignty. She does not use her solitude as a shield. She does not isolate to avoid intimacy. She is capable of love, capable of softness, capable of being open, but only when it is safe, and only when it does not require her to betray herself. That is the discipline, to stay open without losing yourself, to stay kind without becoming a doormat, to stay compassionate without becoming consumed. She has learned the fine line between giving and leaking, between serving and sacrificing. There are days when self-mastery feels like an uphill climb, days when no one sees the effort she puts into staying grounded, days when she wishes for someone to share the weight, to carry just a piece of it. And on those days, she lets herself feel it. She does not shame herself for needing rest, for feeling weary, but even then, she does not collapse into helplessness. She rests, she resets, and then she rises again. That is the quiet discipline, not perfection, but resilience. She holds herself through every version of her becoming, through grief, through joy, through boredom, through transformation. She does not wait for someone to validate her process. She does not shrink when her evolution makes others uncomfortable. She has walked herself through dark nights of the soul. She has peeled back the layers of her conditioning. She has held her own heart when it was aching. No one clapped, no one witnessed, but she did it anyway. That is strength. Her strength also shows in the boundaries she keeps, not as walls to shut people out, but as sacred lines to protect what she has cultivated within. She does not overextend to be liked. She does not pretend to be smaller so others feel larger. She does not confuse kindness with compliance. She says no with the same ease as she says yes, because her yes means something. She does not use guilt as currency. She does not manipulate to be loved. Her relationships are built on mutual respect, or they are not built at all. She is disciplined with her time. She knows that every hour she gives away carelessly is an hour she cannot retrieve. She chooses where her energy goes. She guards her focus like a treasure. She creates space for what matters, whether it is her work, her art, her health, or her joy. She shows up for it with intention. Not because someone else is watching, but because she has decided that her life is worthy of care. She treats her own time like it has value, and in doing so, she becomes a model for others to do the same. Self-mastery is not rigid. It is not the absence of emotion or desire. It is the ability to witness those desires without being ruled by them. She may crave connection, she may miss intimacy, but she does not chase it at the cost of her peace. She does not use love as a distraction from her own healing. She does not lose herself in the hope of being seen. She sees herself, she belongs to herself, and so when love arrives, if it ever does, it will meet her whole. The woman who lives without a man and thrives does not do so because she is exceptional in some superhuman way. She thrives because she has learned to be loyal to herself. She has learned to show up when it's inconvenient, to stay steady when no one is applauding, to commit to her path when it would be easier to abandon it. She has made peace with discomfort. She has learned to stay in the fire long enough to find the gold inside it. She is not perfect. She does not strive to be, but she is honest with herself about what she feels, what she needs, and what she will no longer tolerate. That honesty is hard. It is the result of facing herself in moments of doubt, in hours of silence, in years of growth. And from that honesty, she builds a life that is real, not flashy, not curated, not dependent on being seen, but grounded, stable, and fiercely alive. The quiet discipline of her life is not about proving anything to anyone. It is not about being above love or beyond need. It is about alignment. It is about choosing herself not once, but daily, in the way she speaks to herself, in the way she feeds her body, in the way she respects her time, in the way she stays true to her values when no one is enforcing them. The world may never fully understand the strength of a woman who walks alone and does so with grace, but she does not need the world to understand. She does not live for their permission. Her strength is not a performance. It is a practice, a daily, deliberate, deeply human practice of choosing presence over escape, clarity over confusion, peace over approval. She is her own compass, her own container, her own center, and in that she is free. She is not anti-men. She is simply not dependent on their validation to define her worth, identity, or life choices. This distinction is subtle to some, but profound in the experience of a woman who has spent time unlearning the inherited scripts that taught her to measure herself through a man's gaze. Her detachment from male approval is not bitterness in disguise. It is not an overcorrection, it is a reclamation, a voice of space of narrative. She does not live in defiance of men, she lives in fidelity to herself, and that fidelity does not require opposition, it requires sovereignty. In a world where many women are still conditioned to believe that partnership is the primary gateway to legitimacy, a woman who lives unanchored to that idea is often seen as a threat, an anomaly, or an unfinished story. She disrupts the assumed arc that places men at the center of feminine purpose, but she is not rebelling, she is simply stepping out of that orbit. She is not at war with masculinity, she is at peace with her independence. And that peace is what unsettles those who are still tethered to the belief that a woman's wholeness must be confirmed through male approval. She does not derive her value from being desired. She knows that being wanted is not the same as being respected, that being chosen is not the same as being seen, that being pursued is not the same as being safe. She has untangled herself from the need to perform femininity for the sake of attraction. She does not shift to become more appealing. Her beauty is not a currency, it is a quiet byproduct of her alignment. She dresses for herself. She speaks for herself. She shows up as she is, not as she is instructed to be. This does not mean she cannot enjoy male company. On the contrary, she may deeply appreciate the presence of men who meet her without needing to define her. She may love, connect, laugh, and share space with men, but she does not contort herself to retain that presence. She no longer fears the absence of male attention. It is not a mirror she needs in order to see herself. She has built her own reflection in the stillness of solitude, in the clarity of self-inquiry, and in the trust she now places in her own inner knowing. There was a time when she might have sought validation in the form of male interest, when she waited for the text, for the invitation, for the affirmation that she was good enough, pretty enough, interesting enough to be picked. She remembers that version of herself, not with shame, but with compassion. She sees now how deeply that need was planted in her, through media, through culture, through family, through the subtle and not so subtle messages that told her a man's gaze was the ultimate confirmation of her existence. But she is no longer trying to be seen. She is seeing herself, and that shift has changed everything. When a woman is no longer governed by the pursuit of male validation, her energy becomes expansive. She starts creating for the sake of creation, not for applause. She starts moving through the world not to be observed, but to experience. She begins to take up space in a different way, more grounded, more open, more present. She makes decisions based on her values, her desires, her intuition, not based on what will attract or keep a man. Her life stops being a performance and starts being an embodiment. This change does not make her less feminine. In fact, it often makes her more deeply connected to her feminine essence, because she is no longer outsourcing it. She is no longer diluting her emotions to seem manageable. She is no longer stifling her power to appear submissive. She is no longer performing helplessness to elicit protection. She stands rooted in her emotions, her cycles, her knowing. She no longer requires a masculine witness to feel complete. She meets herself fully. And in that meeting, she becomes magnetic, not in the way that seeks attention, but in the way that commands respect. It is important to recognize that this independence is not always easy. The cultural tide is strong. It pulls women toward self-sacrifice, toward compromise, toward the desire to be claimed. Even now, she may feel the echoes of those old scripts. She may catch herself wondering, would this be easier if I had someone? Or would I be more validated if someone wanted me publicly? But she notices those thoughts without fusing with them. She observes the pull, then returns to center, because she has tasted the freedom of not needing to be chosen, and once that freedom is known, it cannot be forgotten. She is not closed, she is not cold, she is simply discerning. She does not open her life to someone just because they show interest. She does not welcome romantic attention as a default compliment. She filters. She asks, does this person see me? Do they respect my time? Do they understand my boundaries? If the answer is no, she walks away, not out of arrogance, but out of self-trust. She no longer needs to prove her worth by tolerating what drains her. She no longer needs to be polite at the expense of her energy. Her relationships with men, when they do exist, are clear and grounded. She enters them not to be completed, but to be expanded, not to be saved, but to be mirrored. She does not enter with the weight of unhealed wounds hoping to be healed by proximity. She enters with awareness, with a full cup, with the willingness to give and receive without collapsing. And if that kind of connection is not available, she is content to remain with herself. Her solitude is not a punishment, it is a sanctuary. She no longer tolerates dynamics that ask her to shrink. She no longer participates in relationships where her power is perceived as a threat. She no longer contorts herself to be more palatable. If a man cannot meet her with reverence, if he cannot hold space for her fullness, if he cannot stand beside her without needing to diminish her, she lets him go, not with malice, but with clarity. She is no longer seduced by potential. She looks for embodiment, she looks for action, she looks for presence. She does not define her success by her relationship status. She does not interpret singleness as a deficit. She does not feel behind because she is not partnered. She knows that the metric for a well-lived life is not how many people desire you, but how deeply you are connected to yourself. She has redefined success to include peace, freedom, creative expression, emotional safety, and spiritual growth. And in this redefinition, she has reclaimed her time, her body, and her future. This reclamation often changes her relationship with community. When she no longer centers her life around romantic partnership, she begins to deepen other forms of connection. She invests more in friendship. She builds sisterhoods. She mentors and receives mentorship. She creates from a space of shared vision, not just individual achievement. Her world becomes more interconnected, not less. Because when the hunger for male validation fades, the space it once occupied can be filled with richer, more reciprocal forms of intimacy. It is not that she never desires partnership. She is human. She may long for shared laughter, for physical closeness, for emotional resonance with a man, but the longing is no longer desperation. It is not rooted in emptiness. It is a longing she can hold without rushing to fill. She can sit with the desire, acknowledge it, honor it, and still choose herself. That capacity, to hold desire without abandoning self, is the fruit of her inner work, and it makes her love, when it is given, profoundly clean. She does not vilify men. She sees them clearly, some as allies, some as mirrors, some as teachers. She holds space for their humanity, but she no longer feels responsible for carrying their growth. She no longer enters relationships hoping to be the one who changes him. She has learned that real love is not rescue, it is recognition. And if that recognition does not exist from the beginning, it cannot be forced into being. When men approach her, they quickly learn that her energy is not available for conquest. It is not a prize to be won through tactics. She does not respond to pressure, to manipulation, or to performances of masculinity. She responds to presence, to depth, to mutuality, and if those are absent, she simply continues on her path. She does not pause her life in the hope that someone might catch up. She walks forward, eyes open, heart soft, but feet steady. There is a sacredness in the way she holds herself, a refusal to compromise her inner peace for external approval, a quiet confidence that does not scream but radiates. She is not superior to anyone. She is simply clear, clear about her worth, clear about her boundaries, clear about her values. That clarity is what frees her. That clarity is what allows her to live a life that is not reactionary, but intentional. She does not compete with other women for male attention. That game is no longer of interest. She supports other women, celebrates them, uplifts them, not because she is virtuous, but because she is no longer in scarcity. She does not need to diminish another to feel worthy. She does not see other women as threats, but as sisters. She knows that true power is collective, not competitive, and she moves in the world with that knowing. When people ask her why she is alone or why she does not settle down, she does not feel the need to defend her choices. She knows that many ask not from curiosity, but from discomfort. She is a mirror they were not prepared to look into, but she no longer softens herself to make others feel better about their own compromises. She is not responsible for their stories. She is responsible for her own alignment. Her life is not an argument. It is not a statement. It is a presence, a way of being, and in that presence she gives permission, without trying, without speaking, for others to begin asking different questions. Not who will choose me, but how can I choose myself more deeply? Not what do they think of me, but what do I think of myself? Her example is not one of resistance, but of return. Return to self, return to truth, return to wholeness. This is not about being alone forever. It is about not being afraid of that possibility. It is about knowing that if love comes, it will be a compliment, not a correction. A celebration, not a salvation. She does not live in fear of being alone because she knows she is not lacking. She is not missing. She is not incomplete. She is full. She is here, and she is enough.